Good evening and welcome from the National Foreign Language Center for our first monthly teacher panel. We are so excited to have you guys on YouTube and Facebook Live, joining 4 teachers who will be talking today about one of the domains of the TEL framework. If you're not familiar with the TEL framework, it stands for the Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning Framework. And you can get the framework at the TEL Project website, telproject.org. And I have 4 practicing teachers with me here today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves first. And then we are going to kind of dig into the domain and see what this all means for teaching in 2020, 2021, and have a nice conversation. If you have comments or questions, we welcome them. You can enter them either in the chat box on YouTube or in the comment section on Facebook. And when appropriate, we will try to bring in your questions or comments into the conversation. But let's start with introduction. And I forgot, I don't even have you alphabetically anymore. But let's just start with Marta. How about you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Marta Silva, and I teach Spanish at Olathe North High School. My program is Spanish as a heritage language, and I'm also a PhD student of curriculum instruction and Latinx studies.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, I am Josh Shahwan. I am the language department head at Choate Rosemary Hall, and I teach Arabic and French.
Hello, my name is Natalie Stamper, and I teach at Lewis and Clark College. I teach first and second year French courses.
Hi, my name is Liz Matchett, and I teach at Gunn High School in Palo Alto, California. And I'm devastated because my camera just isn't working today. But as we said, as we were practicing, these are the things that happen to us all the time right now. And we power through it because that's what we have to do.
Absolutely. And we are glad that all of you guys are here. And this is what real teachers do, right? The camera doesn't work, you have to teach anyways. So yeah, welcome. We're going to talk about the environment domain. I have a colleague of mine who was one of the co-authors of the framework, the original framework, and she worked with this framework for a long time with her teachers, and she kept saying, we don't have to look at anything else in TEL until we figure out everything that's on this page. For her, the environment domain was the most important one. Now, that's debatable. Some people might argue that there's other ones that are more important, but for her, this was. And it always stuck with me because she kept saying, if we can't figure this relationship thing out with kids, it doesn't matter what you're doing in planning and assessment and anything else. So it seems appropriate that we're starting with this environment one. And it's also appropriate because I think all summer long, I kept hearing from teachers, I don't know how to build a relationship with kids when they're not in my classroom. And that's the reality for many of you guys. I know that some of you guys are teaching hybrid, some of you are teaching face-to-face, some of you are teaching just online. So it's really interesting to see, because when we look at that first TEL criterion there in the environment domain, it says the teacher builds positive relationship with students that support learning. Now that's a mouthful, but how do you do that when you're in an online environment? Anybody have some ideas?
Well, I do, if you don't mind me starting off. I think that we had ideas before we actually saw our students. And then when we saw them and we started building those relationships, it just became so much easier than we ever thought. So during the summer, during those conversations, everything looked very difficult and almost impossible. But once you're there, and also taking into account the ages of the students, my students are high school ages, sometimes they communicate with their friends via phone and FaceTime and Snapchat, etc. So they're used to building relationships with others through camera, which maybe we're not, right? Or some of us were immigrants are used to keeping those communication opens with back home with our families, and we have been working on building those relationships with families. So I think that really helps. When things happen, it looks like it's easier than the theoretical part of it.
And just you can't see me right now, but the teachers we're having a lot of kids not turning their cameras on because for different reasons that they want to protect their home environment, or they just like they can't get their camera to work on a specific day. And the challenge for us to build an environment is to teach regardless of the fact that we can't see people's faces. So somehow we have to have conversations or chat or some kind of an activity that allows the students to participate and feel like they matter in the group. And so it's incumbent upon us to continually add activities every 10 minutes or so where the kids have to participate and see each other and interact. And in that way, a positive relationship starts being built with the teacher and with the fellow students.
Definitely. I would say this year I have really, with my department, we have decided that we are going to spend more time, at least the first couple of weeks, really building that community and making sure that students get to know each other. You know, some of them, this is their first time coming to this school particular or to this class, meeting those students or those teachers. And it was imperative for us to really make them feel that they are in a safe environment, that they feel that there is someone who cares for them. Languages might not be their favorite topic to study, or they might be challenged in some aspects of it. So to really make them feel comfortable. So one of the activities that I have done with my students to really get them to know each other, also taking into consideration everything that's happening around us and how much they would like to share about themselves or not share about themselves. So one of the activities in my French 400 class, which is a Francophone literature class, so we started the year, in fact, by asking each student to go to Padlet and share 5 adjectives to describe themselves. And after they have shared the 5 adjectives, then I paired them automatically in the breakout rooms in Zoom and had them have a conversation with each other about those adjectives. And then when we came back as a class together, each one had to report about one aspect or one adjective that caught their eye and the other student and tell us more about that adjective. So we gave them kind of a time to say who they are indirectly using those adjectives and then have conversations with each other. So to get them to get started to know them in a very low stake environment, you know, talking like, yes, I'm an athlete, or I love traveling, or whatever things that they have done. And then what I did for the class, I said that I'm going to take all these adjectives and I created with them a Wordle. And I said, this is who we are as a class community. And so this is also inspiring for me as a teacher, because this is a reminder for me who I have in my classroom, what are their interests, and it helps me tailor the activities in the classroom based on those adjectives that they use to describe themselves.
Yeah, that's real interesting. And actually, we've got a comment on Facebook that says, so important for learners to know they matter. And while I think it's an important comment, it's a scary one that we have to say this in 2020 when we're moving online. I'm wondering what was, I shouldn't say this out loud almost, I'm wondering what was happening in schools before. It's almost like all of a sudden students matter. So yeah, it's an important comment. So I wonder how you guys feel about that all of a sudden this is a big deal. I don't know what was happening before, but...
They always matter. And I would agree with your colleague about the environment is so important. And that has always been one of my #1 goals, because if that environment isn't there from the beginning, then it doesn't go as well in the classroom. So I teach, right now I'm teaching hybrid. So I'm teaching, some students are in, half my class is in the classroom, half the class is Zooming in their dorms, half the class is like all over the world. So for me, kind of wrapping my head around like, how am I going to do get together or, get to know each other activities. I usually always do a questionnaire at the beginning of the school year. And I found that this year, I mean, my questionnaire was like 2 pages. And I was like, I have a lot of questions. I want to know a lot about you. which I found was really helpful because, as you said, George, I like to, what kind of music do you like? Okay, let me try and integrate that. What kind of interests do you have? I'm going to try and integrate that. Where are you from? Because I have a lot of international students as well. I had to take a pause because I'm in Portland, Oregon, and we had protests and we had fires, and we really needed to just stop and say, are you okay? Do you have what you need? Do you feel safe? Do you have a fan? Do you have, a filter? So we really I had to just stop and just kind of make sure and check in every day, make sure everyone was feeling okay, make sure everyone was feeling like they were safe and that they mattered, One of the main activities I did in my 101 class, my beginning French class, is I had them do a really quick 1-minute Flipgrid introduction about their family, because that's where we start with in 101. And so I had them describe their family members, and then I made a bingo chart from that. And then I gave that as a homework assignment. And I said, okay, you need to go and listen to your colleague or your classmates, and you need to find out this information, like who has a mother named Maretta and who has 2 dogs named Fluffy and Boo. And so then the main part that when we came back was that it was great. I could take the camera and say, okay, who has Fluffy and Boo as their pets? Oh, it's David, and he's right here. And so this is David, who has the 2 dogs, so that we could really make those connections from the online people and from the in-person people. And I feel like it went really, really well, and they made connections within themselves. So that was great.
That's totally. I think 2 things you come to mind now, Natalie. I think one of them is like, it reminds me how before we used to come and start with like, how was your summer? And I think we were all thoughtful this year to not really bring this back and be more mindful about what type of questions we would like to have in the interaction. So I think more questions like, do you need help? Do you need support? How can I help you? Or how we can help you? How are you taking care of yourself? How can we? And I think having those conversations in an indirect way with the students as well, it gives them, and sometimes it's just about a reflection, like give them a question and then maybe have them reflect on it. And all these reflections will tell you as a teacher how you can help support them. And the other one, another activity that I did is like when you mentioned Flipgrid, is like having the students introduce themselves. And then what I did is I built kind of a slideshow based on their hobbies and interests. And I made them guess who's the person based on the hobbies or whatever they introduced. So to see also, to tell them that it's not just about like recording a video and then ditch it and go somewhere else. It's like we are trying here to listen to each other and to build that listening skills, that it's very important, and see with them like how we can work together as a group.
One thing that I did this year that I haven't done in the past, I didn't want to start asking them questions because who am I? I'm so far away from them as a teacher. So we started every class, the heritage classes and also the AP classes, with the kids interviewed me. And I told them, these are the categories. You can ask me anything you want. So we had a process. We just kind of jumped into knowing about somebody else, because I understand that a lot of my kiddos are going through a lot of trauma due to not only COVID, but other issues in the community. So I didn't want them to reflect on anything about themselves at the beginning because of that vulnerability piece. And I wanted to be the one who was vulnerable to them. So they will ask me about my feelings, my opinions, I share the immigrant piece with them. And so I think that really started building our community, and also because they could ask me anything, I could see the personality of those who were asking me questions like, what is your favorite color? Or, hey, how do you get your papers to work here? So I could really, the questions were so diverse. And then they had to write an essay comparing what they know about me and themselves. And it proved to be very much more insightful for me that some other activities that I have done in the past, because they were trying to find things in common and they were asking questions that were very interesting. So I really recommend that, because I think one of the key words in this emotional learning is that the teacher presents himself, herself, in a vulnerable way, like, I'm learning with you. I'm also part of this learning process. Don't you think that this is a piece of cake for me? I'm also trying here. So it worked really well.
I would like to build a little bit on what Marta and what Natalie were saying. It's absolutely important that the students feel comfortable with us and that we not be afraid to be vulnerable. We had, as Natalie mentioned, we had fires. We have fires, unfortunately, on the West Coast. And a big issue for us right now is being able to go outside. Sometimes we can't because the air quality is so bad we can't go outside. So I wanted to meld getting to know my students with building that into my lesson. And we were working on numbers. So what I had the students do was I gave them each a city nearby, and at least one that I knew would have an excellent air quality index, and others that would have horrible air quality indexes. I had them look it up, find out what it was, and then tell the numbers in Spanish, because it was level 1, and that was all they could do. Was like if the air quality was 23, some of them could only say dos, tres, 2, 3, and that was enough. That's all I cared about. The point really here was to use a little bit of language, but also for them to think about, like, well, if the air quality is this bad here, what's worse and what's better, and to start to think about what can I be grateful for, and actually to bring that in and talk with the kids about it, so that they could see I cared about what they were going through, but that they could also have the opportunity to have empathy for what other people were going through.
And to build on that, Liz, I think the idea of like being vulnerable, but also to be grateful and to stay focused on what is positive. And one of the exit tickets, or like the end of like session exercises that I have been doing, or activities with the students, is also have this one-on-one reflection where each one will have to kind of put down something that they are grateful for, or something, for example, that positive that happened with them that day, and then have them give them the opportunity if they want to share it or not with the group. So you could either hold silence, you don't need to share, or you could, if you would like to share, you have the opportunity to share something positive, or that happened with you today, or grateful that for that person in your life, or something that happened, just to keep our spirits up, and to be able to support each other, and be a positive presence for each other in the way. And it brings me to one of the questions in the comments. I think it says about like how do we feel about like students in class and students in person and students online. And this reminded me of one of the comments that the students were saying, so now we are getting ready to welcome our students on campus after 3 weeks of online learning. And some students who are either international, who are in the States, but for certain reason they will not be returning to campus, they've been saying, please don't forget about us. And I think this resonated very well. It was a very in moments that like it makes you feel very like humbled by that students, and like how much this means to them to be part of this community. And I think it is important for all of us who have students in class and students online to make sure that we are connecting them with each other, and not treating them as two different groups, but really bring that community together, make them work with each other, and make sure that we are checking on both of them at all times.
Sure. So I heard you guys sharing lots of ways of how to start the school year. Now we're getting them online. We're getting them maybe even into the building. And I saw lots of conversation, even on Twitter, about this idea about the teacher collaborates with students to create expectations for a safe environment. Norm setting, we know, is important. And in the past, I've been to many classrooms, and on the first day, kids are given this syllabus. And here, all the things are the rules of my classroom. I've even been to classrooms where it says, my classroom rule, Mr. So-and-so, Madame so-and-so rules. And it always bugged me just a bit, because I thought it's not your classroom. It's really the classroom of all these students. And this could be my German upbringing, where the teacher comes into the classroom as opposed to you going to somebody else's classroom. But I think that signals something in American schools, that the kids are going to Madame Signora's classroom. You're entering their realm and their kingdom. And I think a lot of teachers even have their rooms set up a little bit like that. And of course, now all this has been shattered because now they have to, I guess, just enter your Zoom room or your Google Meet room or whatever platform you're in. And so what does this mean for creating expectations? And how can we really collaborate? What do you do with your students to create those expectations for a safe environment? Doesn't matter if that safe environment means in the classroom or safe now in this new online environment.
One thing that we were commenting briefly before is I think that teachers feel very overwhelmed, a lot of teachers, with this situation, and some people are trying to hold on to the same rules and regulations they had before, and try to control the environment, try to control those Zoom meetings, try to make sure that everybody is on task. Lots of teachers request from their students cameras on, which is, from an equity point, is a disgrace, in my opinion. So one thing that we have to be is tremendously flexible, and that collaboration piece is how we show respect for our students. When one thing that I've done with my students this week, today and yesterday, is to show them the format of my class, what I usually do, and then I ask them, what should we change? What do you want me to add? Now that we've been 3 weeks together, how do you think these things can work or not? What would you like to do? Because they want to watch movies. That's gonna work. But we have readings and we have current events and we have so many other things. But how Socratic seminar is gonna? Do we have to do this? How can we do it? And so I'm waiting. These are questions that are going on in this week, and I'm really excited to see what their ideas are, because it's going to be their ideas. If they're embedded, I mean, if they're really engaged and they're part of the community, as you, Thomas, say, I think we're not going to have issues with discipline. Now, if you're an authoritarian teacher who have very strict norms, then good luck with Zoom, etc.
Well, totally true, Marta. And I think to be mindful of equity, to be mindful of creating a safe environment first, as we said, so students to feel welcomed and valued in the classroom. I think what I tried to do this year is I usually will come and have my classroom expectations or norms. And this year what I did is, one of the activities was to bring the students together and have them draft together in small groups. What are our community norms? What would you like to see happen in class? How would you like things to happen? And have them, express their voice and be a presence. When we talk about community, it's not just about us kind of describing what they have to do, but I think they will have more buy-in into what we say or into the classroom if they have helped forge and put these expectations in place. And I think this was a very helpful activity that really helped them and made them feel that they are heard right from the start, and not just in terms of what song do you want to listen to or what game do you want to play.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I'd like to speak to a safe classroom environment, and I think that something that has happened probably to thousands of educators in the past 5 weeks or so is, at one time or another, you may have gotten what they call Zoom bombed, where somebody got into your class who shouldn't be there and started saying hateful things to you and your students. That, in fact, happened to me in the second week of teaching in my heritage class, and it was ugly what happened. So this is what I did immediately to try to recreate a safe environment for my poor students. And that was, first, after I got the person out of the room, I didn't end the class because the kids who belong in the class were still there. And I just said, I am so sorry for what just happened to you. It is not acceptable. It's wrong. And none of you should have had to hear that. And I take responsibility for not setting up my class well enough to keep someone out like that. And then as I was doing that, I was rapidly texting my administrator and saying, I need you to come to my class right now. And my administrator came into the Zoom class, and she also said to them, I am so sorry. And she had a good conversation with them about racism and how there are people in this country, unfortunately, and in the world, who don't treat others the way we should be treated. After she left and I stayed with the students, I had my students say to me, they asked me that, Miss Matchett, are you okay? What that person said to you was really ugly as well. And how are you feeling? And I was basically what I saw was the students, they need to be safe. They want to be safe, and they care about their teachers as well. So if things happen to you that are ugly that way, don't be afraid to just call it what it is and to be vulnerable and honest with them, and then to meet with your administrator, figure out what you can do to set up your permissions so that people can't get in, etc. But it may happen. It doesn't mean you're a bad educator, and it doesn't mean you can't go forward and still repair what's happening with your students.
Well, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that with all of us, because I think that's probably has happened to a lot of teachers. And yeah, thank you.
I was just going to say that for, as far as like doing the norms and establishing the norms, George, I did the same thing this year, which I normally don't do. They're adults, so I kind of assume that at that point we kind of know how to, I haven't had a big problem with that, let's just say. So this year I was like, okay, I have some people who are not here and some people who are physically here. And I wanted to just check in and make sure, what are our norms? What are we, checking in constantly, just saying like, okay, can you hear me okay? Can you hear everybody? Do you feel part of the community when you're online or when you're in person? So I felt like that was really important to establish. And then a couple of years ago, maybe like 2 years ago, I also started adding on my Moodle page, which is like our platform. I have the syllabus and calendar and all sorts of links and things. But I also started putting a part that I say like the very first day of class, I'm like, okay, your assignment is to, make sure and look through the syllabus a little, more thoroughly. We have a syllabusam to see if, you know what the key points are. And then I say, also go to my website, our site, and make sure that you know what the definitions are and you understand what a stereotype threat is, that you understand what a microaggression is. Read a couple of the articles and a couple of the podcasts that I have on how to reboot a biased brain, and some interviews. I have an interview about with Austin Channing Brown and her book. And so it's good to it's something that I'm like, make sure this is where we're all starting. I want to make sure everyone knows what these are and we can identify these so that we can move forward as a group. And so, I feel like that's also an important piece that I like to put in there. For the semester.
Definitely. And I think one thing to keep in mind when we are creating a safe environment is also for the students to know that if they don't feel like sharing in class, or if they feel that they need like a one-on-one moment, is to be able to show them the mechanism how they can reach us after class or during class. Even if you are using Zoom, if they can send us a private message and say like, I need to talk to you, or I need a moment, and they don't want to do that in front of everyone or raise their hand in front of everyone, how can we put in place mechanism to support the students so they can ask for help without exposing themselves or putting themselves on the spot? And I think that's very important.
Yeah, actually, George, now that you say that, I've noticed I have in 3 weeks made more communication one-on-one with my students than ever before at the beginning of an in-person year. It takes time for students to come and talk to you individually, but now with the possibility of chatting privately with you, I had so many, I bet you guys too, students who privately tell you something or ask you questions that they would never they would never ask in class because you have to raise your hand. Everybody understands that you don't know what's going on. So now they can ask you in a private way, which is fantastic for the communication piece. I have to say, though, it takes a huge toll on the teacher. I feel like I'm answering emails and texts and everything constantly. And it's part of what this is right now. But we have blogs of 90 minutes, which really, really helps us not to rush things. And so I can leave 20 minutes at the end for some kind of talk with other students. But I think this possibility of talking to your teacher in that private way without exposing yourself in front of others have been very beneficial for our classes and for creating that collaboration student-teacher.
So you mentioned that you've been answering a lot more questions for students. So I'm wondering if is it the same kind of students who would have been the ones asking questions in the face-to-face classroom, or was it different students? That would be my first part. And then the second part of my question would be, so what does that mean for, let's say, going back to the classroom, whenever that is? Because I think we're establishing certain norms and expectations with those students who may be finding a voice in school for the very first time. And I would hate for that to go away. And so anybody have any ideas, creative ideas for how to maintain those communication channels without, as you said, we don't want to burn out the teachers either, because that takes a lot of time to respond to individual message from all these students.
I am really enjoying the fact that, I know you're not going to believe I'm going to say this, but that some kids don't use their cameras because I don't have the opportunity to create a bias or to create a judgment about who they are or what kind of learner they are. I can only go off by literally exactly what they do in the language. And I feel like the students are actually benefiting from that. I am a warm demander, meaning that there's no way that if you come to my class that you're getting out of it at the end without having participated in some way. You're going to do something in the language while you're there with me. And all of my kids who come to class are actually doing okay right now. And I can't always say that for sure about kids in my classroom. And I'm not sure if that's because of me or them or the circumstances or anything, but there are some benefits to being far away from the kids in that regard. I've also had a couple kids tell me that they're doing, and you can see that they're doing much better because, for example, kids with anxiety issues or kids with who can't sleep at night, or who they manage to come to class, but they don't have to get dressed or worry about whether other kids think about them or see them. So there are kids who are doing better in this situation.
And I think we're getting comments from that, other people agreeing with all of you guys, that we're reaching kids that may have not been reached before, right?
And to answer very briefly your question, Thomas. So for me, those who ask me questions in a private mode are the ones who would never ask me questions in class. Those who ask a question to everyone are the ones who will raise their hand anyway, and they understand. And I always say, even if you think your question is not valid enough, somebody else is in the classroom thinking the same question. So the ones who ask questions are really the brave ones. But it doesn't matter, there's that tension, mainly at the beginning, before we really have time to build this community. So yes, I don't know what we can do, honestly, when we come back in person. I don't know if we could have a system with technology, if we can have a system where questions can pop up in our device, if students have questions and we can address them. And I think that would be very easy to like with conferences, etc. We can set that up. It's actually a very good idea for the future.
It's definitely the teaching and learning online has brought a little bit more, empowered more students who are more reserved in the classroom, who usually are not vocal, who usually are shy to maybe share or talk, and having those in private modes to be able to communicate, it kind of empowered them. And made you feel as a teacher that they are more present. And in fact, I was like, oh wow, like I'm getting more interaction from the student that I usually do. And to your point, Thomas, I think one of the ways that I am trying to do with my students is to also, in the feedback and the comments that I am leaving on their work or something, to invite them to come and talk to me. And I think that's what I would like to do when we move into in-person or the hybrid, when I have students in the classroom, is to keep that invitation open, remind them that I am there as a presence for them, that they can come and talk to me. They can either schedule a Zoom meeting if they would like, or if they would like to see me in person, whatever. But I think the comments that we leave also on their work, it's very important. And sometimes we can send them the messages to empower them and to support them. For example, I've been also, we talked a lot about like some structured activities to do all of this. What I found also very important this year is to build in some activities where students can express themselves either in writing or in speaking on any topic they would like to share. And you would be, in fact, surprised of how much they are sharing. And so in the ways that I went in providing my comment before pointing out like the mistakes or whatever, things that we usually do as teachers, is at first to thank them for sharing whatever they are sharing with me, and say thank you for sharing with me this experience, or thank you for bringing this to my attention, and then go back and to offer them an opportunity to speak in person or to speak via Zoom. I think that's very important.
I'd like to address the use of the target language in the class now, because in my department, it's been a topic of conversation. People are either not using it as much as they used to, or extremely worried about what's happening. And so I want to talk about what I'm doing, and that is I am still doing the 90-10, but I'm using my 10. I didn't use my 10 before, meaning 90% in the target language, 10% not in the target language. Before, I tried really hard to never use that 10, to always be 100% in the target language. And now there are times when I use it, and I use it for stuff like this. At the end of the class, I'll take like 2 minutes and I'll say to everybody, guys, I just want to take a second and process what we all did and what I'm trying to accomplish with you and where I'm trying to get you, and the effort that you're making to show up in class and to participate and to speak in the chat and to upload things for me and to help me when my links don't work. I am so proud and happy for you that you're getting this. And thank you so much for what you're giving me, because as a teacher, I was born to work with you, and I'm not getting to do that in person. So, and then when you praise the kids and they feel that how much you care, and they come and they continue to give to you. And so I think that's a really worthy use of your 10% in English. I'm going to tell my people in my department that.
No, I agree. Okay, well then I think having exhausted that a little bit, maybe we should go to the next one, which could be an interesting one to talk about, because the third, actually it's the fourth one. I kind of skipped one because it was very similar to the second one, but the fourth child criteria in this domain states that the teacher creates an environment focused on language, performance, and proficiency. And again, that's a mouthful. There's lots of buzzwords in this one, of course. And how do we do that face-to-face? How do we do that online? How do we do that hybrid? What are you guys thinking?
Well, maybe I can just jump in to start, but you know, it's interesting because when I was looking at what this year was going to be, or how I was going to formulate this hybrid match, I was like, there's a lot of vocabulary I don't know, as far as like the Zoom breakout room and how am I gonna, you know, and the chat, you're on mute, you're muted. I get done saying that. And I'm like, okay, I gotta back up and be like, what are all the new norms, like the new vocabulary words, other than like, I don't understand and please repeat and like those kind of things. Like I had to create a whole nother part so that we could function in the language while we were online. And so doing that first was good, and just kind of establishing that and practicing that a little bit. And then, you know, I think for me, it's like, it's always really, really important to start. We're starting with just such minimum things, but it's always good to get the questions out, because that's where you find the interaction and you can stay in the language, even if it's very, very small, for short utterances, like, you know, where, how, with whom, you know, just these little things that they can like grab on and have a mini conversation. And so that's where I always start, and I even started a little earlier with my beginning students, so that we could get talking about like the asking of the question and the answering of the questions, and then immediately finding those connections, so we could also improve our environment and build our community as well.
We did something similar at our school. We created a whole lesson for all of our languages and levels on vocabulary associated with distance learning, so that the kids could continue to do it in the target language. And the other thing, I mean, I'm sure that so many of you have been agonizing, how are we going to assess students? And that can be the topic of a whole nother panel. But as I was hanging laundry out one day, I thought, I came to it, it's like, I can just let go of this whole idea of, how am I going to test if they know the vocabulary words? I really can let go of that, and I can focus on tasks and really having the conversation with the kids about, this year has to be about what can you do in the target language, and I have to give them stuff to do. And so this environment that's focused on performance and proficiency is really about me letting go of the old way of thinking about testing and really focusing on finding ways to give kids to do constantly things that show what they are able to do in the target language. I think this is an opportunity to actually radically transform what we do all the time, because we're being forced to think about tasks now instead of constantly of the old-fashioned idea of assessment.
You can't see me, but I'm jumping up and down. I'm jumping up and down because you go Liz.
Well, one way also of like keeping all that in mind and also taking into consideration to bring it back about like the class community and the importance is here more than ever to take care of yourselves. And I think when we are on Zoom, we want also the students, if they need a moment for themselves, like if they want to use the restroom, or if they want to go grab a glass of water, or if they want to just stretch and come back, or if they just need to disconnect for 1 minute, instead of having to interrupt the class and ask for a permission to do that. We have created cards in the target language about like, so now if I need to like take a break, and then I will post that on my screen, and then I will go and come back without even asking, and then that will signal to the teacher that this is what's happening. And if you can't choose it by a picture, you can then type it or copy paste it in the chat, so the teacher will know if you are not using your camera that you need to take a moment for yourself, and you do not interrupt to ask to go to the restroom or do anything else. So I think using those ways also in like more practical way and real life way to do things instead of having to interrupt, it's also one of the ways to go back to proficiency and the target language.
Can I add something to that really quick? That made me think of one of my favorite things to do right now is so my classes are 1 hour, and I always like to do in petite pause. So we have this little brain break at 30 minutes or around then. And so I always try and find like, what's something I can do for 1 minute? And so I found like some great like yoga in French, like just 1 minute like deep breathing or little stretches, and we stretch. Or I found some great like North African music, and I'm like, okay, turn off your computer or turn off your video and just dance around for 1 minute. We're all just gonna dance. Or Yo-Yo Ma recently has posted a lot of songs of compassion. And so he has like these 1 minute songs that are just beautiful. And I'm like, think of like a happy memory or some happy moment, and just shut your eyes and think about that for a minute. And then my favorite one was I don't know if I'm going to get it right, but it's a Japanese term, Shinrin Yoku, which literally means like forest bathing. And so when we were in the fires and we couldn't go outside, I was like, we're going to have a virtual walk through the forest and just envision it. And just, I'm saying it in French. I'm like, on va marcher. And then like you're bathing in the light and the leaves and the sunshine. And so that's been a really fun little thing that I like to do. And it's taken me on these really interesting routes as far as finding like, what am I going to do for that like 1 minute of like break time?
And I think it's more important than ever to also connect students with each other, even outside of the classroom, and make sure like connecting them with other communities of students who are learning the same language and going through the same thing. And one teacher in the Arabic field created a flip grid for all Arabic teachers, and then we are now collaborating across different schools, and the students introduce themselves to each other, and they are starting asking questions to each other. And I think this is kind of, again, bringing like learning language to a real task where you are meeting other people outside of your classroom, bringing the conversation to outside of the classroom, and in a situation where it's not rehearsed, and then that you are really pushing them to feel like, okay, now I'm connecting with someone who is going through the same thing, and then expanding their support system. And I think here we have a question about like, I think this is one way of encouraging students not to be competitors, but to be more encouraging of each other and trying to support each other, not just in their own school and community, but across schools and communities.
So that's an interesting question, right? I wonder how you guys feel about this, because I think it goes well with some of the earlier statements we had from the domain, and now this one too. So often, many teachers or students view whatever language class is just a class, and I'm trying to get a good grade in it. But if you're talking about a collaborative environment that respects everybody, how do you feel about? How would you answer this question from Greta?
I'm gonna talk a little bit about last question and just link it to this one. Since I teach heritage students, performance and proficiency for me just looks different. But now I have one class of AP Spanish and we're doing the same. So it means that really regular world language classes can be doing the same as heritage students are doing, because we're using language as a tool, right? We're not learning about language. We are using language as a tool to learn about concepts in life and events and situations, etc. And it becomes more natural. And I think when you don't give students list of vocabulary to compete and list of, in grades, when you let students be creative, and I think that's the key for our feedback or summative assessments, however you want to call it this semester, is to have the students create something. When you create your own thing, you're not competing with anybody else, because it's very personal and everybody's talented at something different. Like my students are going to start creating podcasts, both heritage students and non-heritage students. So they're already thinking about what they're experts on and how can they express, some ideas about that. So I do think that, unfortunately, I mean, I'll take in person any day, but this online environment is teaching us to start not assuming that the normal was good. It was fair. It was equitable for everybody, because it wasn't. I think we were focusing on the wrong goals for our world language students. So focusing on creation will be my answer for that competitiveness versus encouraging others to do good.
I'd like to build on what Marta is saying and also answer one of the questions here in the chat, which is how do we try to create virtual experiences for students and connect them with other people? And the answer, I think, really goes toward the idea of we have to stop worrying about assessing kids on different language, teaching about language and using language for real world purposes. So I'm going to give an example of one of the things that I did this year with my students. We kicked the year off by reading John Lewis's final message to our country before he passed away. We read it in Spanish, of course, and we did a whole lesson around it. And they had to really think about what does it mean to that was John Lewis's legacy. That message, talked about his legacy as a person, as a human being, and as a lawmaker. And so I wanted the kids to think about what is your legacy that you want to leave when you go on with things. And the kids told me that they appreciated the fact that I wasn't just ignoring what had happened this summer, that I started the year off with that. And they also told me that in doing that and the group work activities that I made to go with that they got to know each other. So what will happen now when they go forward into other lessons that they'll do is they feel safe enough from what they had done and what they talked about, that I will ask them to find people who speak Spanish and interview them about other topics that are of interest to them. So the way that they connect outside and get to use a language is I'll give them something real to find out about from other people, and then find a way to come back into our classroom and tell about what they learned and have conversations about that so that they can use it for interpersonal activities that have purpose. The kids are so, they're stuck at home now. They really need the opportunity to learn about things that are actually happening and that are real, and using the language to do that. And we can build lessons if we think about it to do these things.
I go back to the question of the competitiveness, and I think I want to say I might not totally agree with that question, because I think I'm a competitive person, and I think my competition is myself. And at this moment, it's very important to create opportunities for our students to really push them to do the best of themselves, and especially our students of colors who are in the classroom, and for many reasons they are afraid of really embracing their presence in the class and shine and be leaders in the classroom. And I have one student in my classroom who I've been having a conversation with the student about, you have wonderful French. Your accent is wonderful. Your vocab, your structures, the way you express yourself, and the students keep muting themselves and they don't want to talk. And I have been trying to really empower them in a way so that they can compete with themselves. I want them to get out of that shell and be a presence in the classroom. And I think competitiveness is not always bad. I think sometimes it is good, and we all need some competitiveness with ourselves to show the best part of ourselves and to challenge ourselves to reach new heights in our career, in whatever we are doing. And I think I just wanted to say that.
Well, then let me challenge you, I guess. I want to connect to something that Liz just said about how she started off with the John Lewis quote and the idea of them. This may have been the first time they heard it, actually, and it's interesting. They may not have expected to learn it in a language classroom, right? So perhaps language classroom isn't just about learning a language, right? And I think some of you guys have connected that already in your answers. That brings us really to the last criterion in the environment domain, which is the teacher creates an environment that promotes intercultural thinking. And while perhaps the idea of interculturality is still new to many people, it's one I think that might be critical now more than ever. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this, and because it's almost like we have a fight going on. What is the real purpose of language class? Is it language? Is it interculturality? Is it community? Which part is it? And people have very strong opinions. So I'm wondering what your opinions are.
I accept the challenge, Thomas. That's very important, and I think sometimes it is. We can, through interculturality, we can find ways of touching upon points that they are very important in our students' life without having to talk about these points in immediate relation to them. For example, in my French literature course, we are reading Francophone literature. And this year I decided to start with an author that is not part of our curriculum, which is Amin Malouf, a Lebanese Francophone author in French, who had a book written. It's named Les Identités Meurtrières, or The Killing Identities. And the main question about it, about identity, are you Lebanese or are you French? And my students had to explore the idea of like those interactions between these two personalities in one through that book, and also learn about, for example, how in the Arab world, the names of the people have indicators, for example, in Lebanon, their religious identity markers. It depends based on your name. We can know without asking you the question, who are you? So it was a very important idea to kind of learn a little bit about the background, about the Civil War, about all of that's happened, and then to reflect on what's happening currently in the United States. All that in the target language, while we are using as much as vocab as they can and structures, but empowering them to have more deep and meaningful conversations, and offering them, as I said during the NFLC, windows and mirrors through the experiences that they are around them, because we need to offer our students also some windows to look through them into other cultures and what's happening in other parts of the world, and not just be focusing on themselves. But at the same time, we want to offer them mirrors so that they can see themselves reflected in this.
And I would like to follow what Liz said, and I think it's very important, and it links to this intercultural knowledge and practices. Because I am a heritage speakers teacher, and that's what I teach and study and live, because that's my own family. And I've been placed this year by accident as an AP teacher, because I'm the remote teacher for the semester. So I have not done that in the past. I've encountered these students who are very used to what we call the prestige kind of a Spanish. They have knowledge about Spain, incredible knowledge about Spain and Colombia, Argentina, Chile, all these places. And I'm introducing them to the Spanish of the United States, to their own classmates who speak the language, and not only speak the language, but they speak the culture, and they have the culture in their houses, and sometimes are next door to you. So my proposal for this semester with these students, and I think then they're gonna go back to their Spanish teachers, who are going to again use that prestige Spanish from Spain, teachings is to just reach into the community, because that part of social justice is so important, and we have it here in our backyard, and it makes language be more useful, culture be more useful, because you don't have to talk about what is happening in Spain, in the independence of Catalonia, and talk about that in the distance. You can talk about what's happening in our neighborhoods, because we have things happening to our Latino community that is very unfair, and our students, white students or non-Hispanic students, are part of it too. So can we relate to that? Can we make friends? Can we make that community work together? And I think that's a bigger lesson than any language can teach you. And from the heritage students also, to know that their kids who are learning about their culture, their language, and they want to build their future together. This is the future of our country. So we better put them in contact instead of dividing them into two separate groups: the monolinguals who learn another language as a luxury tool, and the bilingual kids who are told not to speak their own language because it's not accepted.
Totally true, Marta. And I think all those conversations are very important. I think, but what it is more important is to also keep that conversation going and create opportunities for students to continue either through a forum or through a other platform, this conversation. Because if that conversation like ends with what was us reading that text or just addressing that video in the classroom, it is not a real situation, and it is more of like a classroom situation. So it is important to let them express their voices and see where they are going to take that conversation, and then build on that and try to find different ways to connect it to our future lessons that they are coming. I think this is important to, in fact, teach them that these conversations are more important. And I think for me, when we talk about interculturality, to have that piece of it, you have to add to it. You just not have to look at what the others are, but you have to add your own piece, your own contribution.
Yes.
Yeah. I was just going to add that I think I love interculturality, and I did a workshop actually in the spring about it. So, but I think that piece of bringing yourself into the equation too is really important, because I think a lot of it's easy for my international students to come and say, oh yes, this is my culture, this is from here. But for Americans who are monolingual and are white, and they're like, what is my culture? I don't even know what my culture is. And I feel like you really need to understand that piece to understand and have the respect and making those connections. That I think that really, out of everything that interculturality is about, I think really that connected piece, and not how we're different, but how we're the same, is like the most important piece of learning through interculturality and through another language, but learning about interculturality. So I just want to...
Perhaps we've done a disservice actually to our country, because I think for so long we have focused on the foreign, on the other, right? Textbooks, lessons have been so focused on, which country are we going to today? And we're going to learn about this. And we've forgotten all about that. They don't even know about their own country, their own state, and their own city. And from a job, I worked in Louisville, Kentucky, which is now in the news all the time. But some of those kids had never left. They didn't leave. They had never left their city. They had never left their neighborhood. So when we were doing lessons about just Louisville, so that we can then compare it to perhaps a city in another country, they didn't know anything about their own city because they'd never left that part of their neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And so I'm glad that we're moving into that direction, because it's nice to learn about other things, but it's a whole lot nicer when you learn about yourself first, right?
Right. Well, and to question what you think, to ask yourself questions about, like, oh, is this normal? Oh, is this normal just for me? Oh, okay. And you have to like start asking those questions, because if you don't ask those questions, then you don't get to that next level of understanding, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, we got, I think that may have been my favorite part of the conversation at the very end. We probably talk about this part, interculturality, and what that means for language learning, just on a whole thing. But I think our time, unfortunately, is already over. So I want to thank the four of you guys for giving up an evening and sharing so many ideas. I know the people who are watching live enjoyed it. And I know others will enjoy it as they're watching the rebroadcast. So if you have this video on your Facebook stream, feel free to share it. Or if you see it on YouTube, share with your friends and your colleagues. I would like to take the opportunity to let you know that we will have these conversations now once a month. And the next one actually will be on October, no, I forgot it already. I believe it's October 20th. Or October 22nd. It'll be a Tuesday again at 8 o'clock Eastern, and we'll be talking about the learning experience there. I hope many of you guys will join us for that conversation. But thank you to our panelists today, and I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of the year. I know there were people saying they would all love to be a student in your class, and I feel the same way. And so thank you guys, and thank you to our audience.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming.